All right, welcome everybody. Let's learn some Talmud. So we're jumping ahead today to Yevamot 107. So this is like this week's, I think today is 110, is today's like Daf Yomi page for the people who have been studying a page a day since January 2020. But 107 is where the Mishnah starts, so that's a cleaner place to begin, but you'll calibrate a little bit and kind of see generally what people are looking at this week. Yevamot is primarily concerned with Levirate marriage, which is not practiced anymore. In some communities, they do still have to do the chalitza. I think in some communities they still do that, which is like where, I don't know, there's a little ceremony where, so Levirate marriage is the practice of like when a man dies without having children, and his widow is supposed to marry the next of kin to continue the line. And that went out of practice like kind of early. I think it seems like it was never really widely practiced outside of the Bible. But to get around that rule, there was this ceremony concocted where the brother-in-law would like take his shoe off, and I don't know, there's a whole, recite some sort of formula to release the woman, or for the woman to release the man from his duty and whatever. So, but even that is like not widely practiced either. So, but at the time of the Mishnah, it maybe still was. Anyway, so it's archaic. I have, as I've said, I have fallen off the Daf Yomi boat, and so I have not been keeping up with Yevamot, but from what I have seen in all of my Daf Yomi chat groups that I never left because I maintain hope that someday I'll catch up again. People have been very uncomfortable with this tractate. So just to give you that heads up, that it's full of this very archaic, weird marriage law that is not practiced, that's demeaning to both the man and the woman involved. And so that's what we're dealing with. So just for that heads up. Okay, so the Mishnah here, first the publishers are giving us a little bit of a like recap from previously on the Talmud. The sages decreed that in the case of a minor girl whose father died, her mother or brothers may marry her off. However, such a marriage does not have the same legal status as the marriage of an adult. Therefore, if a minor regrets having married, she is allowed to make a declaration of refusal to her husband, thereby annulling the marital bond. The sages disagreed with regard to the details of this halakha. So here it looks like we're talking about perhaps the betrothal has been made, but not the marriage. And so what, if the men involved if any of the men involved in that agreement die, then what is the next, what happens next, and how are the young girls involved allowed to take any ownership for themselves here? So Beit Shammai Omrim, the house of Shammai, meaning the students who sort of align themselves with Shammai's general approach to things, in contradiction to Hillel's general response to things. Beit Shammai say, only betrothed girls may refuse. A girl may refuse upon reaching adulthood to remain married to the man whom her mother or brothers married her to as a minor after the death of her father. But Beit Hillel say that both betrothed and fully married girls may refuse. It was very typical for Hillel to always take the more lenient approach to disputes in halakha. So Shammai says if the nuptials are fully agreed upon, if they've already stood under the chuppah, possibly even consummated, even if the girl has not yet reached adulthood, that marriage is valid and she cannot annul it. She could only ask for a get. Beit Hillel says a child is a child, and upon reaching adult is allowed to undo the things that have been done to her as a child, basically, whether she's betrothed or fully halachically married. Yes, Terry.
So this is a minor, probably a minor in today's world.
Yes.
So if this young girl was married as a minor, would she fulfill all the functions of a wife?
Probably. I mean, if she's halachically married, that means that she's fertile, right? Like they might betroth her young, but they wouldn't officiate the marriage until she's 13 or whatever, until she starts her menses.
Okay.
Which is still quite young, but yes, then I think at that point she might be expected to perform the duties of a wife.
And so I don't know if you know, but then if she is fully married, then at what age
is she considered an adult?
No, at what age could she refuse being married?
I guess at any age. Like if she's married off at a young enough age that she doesn't feel like she has the voice to dissent, and then regrets it, I think it sounds like maybe they'll explain this more,
Okay.
or maybe it was explained above. No, the above is just chalitza. So I think it sounds like at any age, according to Beit Hillel, right?
True
according
enough.
to Beit Shammai, if they're
Right.
married, then she has to go through the whole divorce process.
Right.
And maybe also, I don't know, I would imagine if there are children involved, if she doesn't bear a child herself, then it might be too late to refuse the marriage, and then she has to go through a regular divorce process.
Now it's sounding like a Talmudic discussion.
Lots of variables. Anything might be relevant. Okay, right. So let's see. What else does Beit Shammai Omrim? Beit Shammai say refusal may be directed only at her husband and not at her yavam. So, okay, so now we're bringing it back to the topic at hand of the whole tractate, the question of chalitza. So if the husband dies, she can't, if the husband dies before she has a chance to refuse the marriage stands. And she still has to go through the process of chalitza in order to not be automatically married to the next of kin. That's the Yavam, the person who would be levirate married to her. But Beit Hillel says, no, if the husband dies before she has an opportunity to refuse him, she can also just refuse the Yavam. Again, Beit Hillel is just going to keep trying to limit the barriers. Notice, though, that Beit Hillel doesn't ever say, like, well, maybe we should just not marry off children. Like, we're not going to go that far, but we're gonna try to lessen the strictness of the laws as they exist.
And again, I am surprised that a young girl, a woman, a female, is given any rights.
Yeah. There are lots of examples like that throughout Judaism, and I find it very useful to like put it in that context where there are things that are being said that by our modern sensibilities are still abhorrent, but for their time, the idea of having like autonomy for a woman at all was radical. I mean, like the Jewish laws of divorce were pretty advanced. That it was mostly in the power of the woman, and then it got corrupted, and this whole like refusing a get thing that men do occasionally now, like that's relatively recent. That's only like within the last 200 years or whatever that started
That's
happening.
pretty recent.
I mean, it's recent when like
Yeah.
the laws of get are
Yeah.
written into the Bible, like
Yeah. Relatively,
right.
it's very recent.
It's very recent. So, yeah, so there are lots of ways that you just have to remember to put Torah in its context.
Yes.
And it actually is quite progressive for its time.
Yes.
And to me, that tells us that as society progresses, Judaism should continue to be on the cutting edge of social progression, autonomy for everyone, equity, these issues that the Torah and the Talmud clearly think are important, but like they can only see so far ahead of where the rest of society is. You know what I mean? So we have to
absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So again, Beit Shammai Omrim. We're going to keep putting them first because I mean, so far none of this has been like teased out. We're just saying Beit Shammai says, Beit Hillel says, but the positioning of Beit Shammai first every time, I think, is to set us up for the superiority of Beit Hillel, right? They're like, Beit Shammai says this, but Beit Hillel says this, and this is clearly the better opinion. You know what I mean? So Beit Shammai Omer, Bifanav, only in the presence of the husband can she refuse him, which then again, makes it difficult if he dies, to the Chalitza question.
Yeah.
So Beit Hillel says, in his presence or not in his presence. Beit Shammai says, only in court before a Beit Din. Beit Hillel says, before a Beit Din or not before a Beit Din. Although if it's not in front of the man or the court, then you kind of have to wonder, who is she actually refusing to? Like if she sits in her room alone and says, I refuse, and there's no one there to hear her, did she really refuse?
Yes, but.
Okay, so Omru Lahem, Beit Hillel Leveit Shammai. So Beit Hillel said to Beit Shammai, Mima'enet Vehi Katana. She may refuse as long as she is a minor. Afilu arba'a v'chamesh pa'amim. Even 4 or 5 times if her relatives keep trying to marry her off. Okay, so this answers your question earlier, Terry, about how old.
Okay.
So as long as she's still a minor, although we don't know exactly what the age of majority is at this time.
Well,
I'm gonna guess 15 or 16. What?
I'm sorry, Rabbit. What you said makes sense, whether it's 13 or when she begins to menstruate.
Yeah. Amru Lahem Beit Shammai said back to Beit Hillel, Ein Banot Yisrael Hefker. The daughters of Israel are not to be treated with disregard. Ele Mim'enet Mamtenet Ad Shetagdil. So she should not be passed from one man to the other. So she refuses only once, and then we assume that her family backs off. V'tima'an v'tinase, that she must wait until she reaches maturity and refuse, and then she can marry as an adult. So this is all still the Mishnah. All of this was the Mishnah. Now we're going to get Gemara. Gimel Mem. Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel. So Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Rabbi Shmuel, my tamai devet Shammai. So what is the reason that Beit Shammai said what he said? That is the ruling that a married minor girl may not perform refusal. Lefi she'en tanai b'nisuin. It is because there are no conditions with regard to marriage. So although betrothal can be conditional and the condition can be nullified, like if one, if this happens and the marriage doesn't, kind of thing with the betrothal, that does not occur in a marriage. So a marriage cannot be conditional, and once the marriage is consummated, it cannot be refused. It can only be divorced. Although, well, okay, let's keep reading and then I'll say what I think is wrong with this, but maybe the Talmud will say it for me. Ve'i nisua tima'en. So if a married girl refuses, ate lemeimar yesh tanai b'nisuin. If a married girl refuses, they will come to say here that there is a condition with regard to marriage. So, okay, let's fill in the blanks of the Hebrew here. So if a married minor girl refuses, others may mistakenly think that this is a condition with regard to the marriage of an adult woman, and will come to say that there can be a condition with regard to marriage. Okay, so it looks like they're not going to raise the question that I have here, because now we're going to get into at what point we're just going to keep getting into nitty gritty of at what point she can refuse. So conditions with regard to marriage do exist. Like that's the point of the ketubah, that if the man doesn't fulfill XYZ expectations of the wife, she can ask for the get, which I guess is still, those are grounds for divorce, not for annulment. So that's different than what they're talking about, but those are still like every covenant, every agreement has its conditions. Like you must keep up your end of the bargain for me to keep up mine. So I don't know if that's just a problem of the Hebrew being too terse, or that they that's a different situation, so they're not going to get into it, or that they forgot that situation exists and is conditions on a marriage. But anyway, I want to raise that. But the Gemara, let's see. So the Gemara is not really concerned with that right now. They are concerned with at what point exactly can she still refuse. So niknasa lechupa velo niv'ala. So what if they've sat under the canopy, they've signed the ketubah, they had the wedding, they're officially married, but the marriage has not been consummated in a sexual way. My eka lememar. So then what? The fisha ain't tanai bechupa. There are no conditions with regard to a wedding canopy, i.e., the wedding ceremony. So the marriage is still valid. Misar ha'av lishluchei haba'al. What if the father delivered his daughter to the agents of the husband to be married, so that she was considered married even before the marriage ceremony took place? What then? La plug rabanan. The sages did not distinguish. Again, I feel like that doesn't. Then what's the difference between marriage and betrothal? Because if they're not under the chuppah together, then isn't that the betrothal?
They need to define what constitutes the state of marriage or being married. Right. Like what?
So let's say the two fathers have agreed on a betrothal. That's betrothal. That's step one. Then the father gives his daughter to the agent of the husband. Say the husband lives far away, and the two families are not able to have a wedding together. So the father gives his daughter to the agent to bring to the groom back in his homeland, and the wedding will happen there. But as soon as the father says, goodbye, as soon as the daughter's out of sight of her family of origin, she is considered married even before she is under the chuppah. I think is the distinction here in
Mhm.
like the various steps between betrothal, agent, chuppah. So that still counts as like it's too late for the girl to
Back out.
refuse. Yeah,
No runaway brides.
no runaway brides. Or maybe she has to run away because she can't just say no. Is the
Right,
yeah,
true
okay.
enough. Yeah.
All right. Uvet Hillel, but according, that's so this is all still, sort of in accordance with Beit Shammai's rulings of how of slightly more strict when can she say no. But Beit Hillel, Mida Yadi Denisue Katana Darabanan Ninhu. So why does Beit Hillel say what they say? It is known that marriage of a minor girl is by rabbinic law, and therefore no one would confuse this type of marriage with an adult marriage. It's not the same as Torah law. There are certain types of marriage that the Torah recognizes. This is not one of them. So the rabbis are like, we recognize that our own law is less than Torah law. Like the rules are different and we have the capability to be flexible with them.
Wow.
Rabba v'Rav Yosef de Amri Tarvayehu. Ooh, that's a tough word. So Rabbi Yosef and Rabbah both say, Tam'a devet Shammai lefi she'en adam oseh be'ilato be'ilat znut. Ooh. Beit Shammai's reason is that a man would not readily render his sexual act licentious sexual intercourse. Okay, so zanut, it means like harlotry. So let's tease out what this is actually saying. If he had intercourse with a minor girl and the marriage was later retroactively annulled by her refusal, then his sexual act was outside the context of marriage and is regarded as licentious. So even if a man accepted the marriage to a minor girl, he would know not to have sex with her until she's an adult.
Right.
Thus lengthening according to Hillel, the time frame for which she can refuse and not scandalize both parties. The Gemara continues. So this kind of stuff, where there's no citation here, Nichnasa lechupa velo nivala. What do we say if she entered the marriage canopy but did not engage in sexual intercourse? This is a repeat of the question above. So this is the same question, but this was in response to like the framework that Beit Shammai gives us, and this is in response to the framework that Beit Hillel gives us, and we're just trying to tease out all of the possible nuances and variables that would help decide at what point a girl can refuse the marriage. And the framing here, so there's no citation, it's repeating its questions. This is the stum. This is brought here as a way of framing the argument of the main authors of the Talmud, right? Like the bulk of the argumentation in the Talmud comes from these rabbis between 70 and 500 CE. But when it's framed like this and the questions are posed to like set up the arguments that happen asynchronously, this is the rabbis between 5 and 800 CE that write these and kind of help just structure. Does that make sense? Terry, you're making a face like it doesn't make sense. How can I better explain that?
You know what? Maybe at the end, I
Okay.
wanted to go through the structure because there's so many, to me at least, pieces that seem like they're in order. So maybe, after we're finished, if there's just a minute or two, we can do that. And that probably will answer my confusion.
Okay. All right. So the Gemara asks, if she enters the marriage canopy but did not engage in sexual intercourse, then then the man's not behaving licentiously because they didn't have sex. So, what then? How do we read it? My Eka Lim Neymar. They're not like translating this correctly, but that's it. It's like, now what? So the Gemara answers, La nicha le de ve chupa de isura. It would not be satisfactory for him. That is, for the husband, it would be a forbidden marriage canopy. Because if the marriage is later annulled by her refusal, he will have stood under the marriage canopy with a woman who is not permitted to him. So now we're taking it a step further, that if he knows that he should not be having sex with this minor, then he should know he should not stand under the chuppah with this minor.
Oh my
So, right. So we're kind of nullifying the very question, right?
Or the very beginning of the first statements. Like,
right.
Yeah.
So, right. So why, again, like, why is this marriage contract even being allowed to be struck if she's too young to actually consent to it? And we're coming up with all of these loopholes to give her space to annul it, to refuse. But like, we could just say, don't marry off your minor daughters.
Exactly.
But that's not how the Talmud works.
No.
We have this principle. So part of it is that the Mishnah, and I'm not sure where their citation is for this, that a minor girl may be married off. Let's see, none of these are in English. But the Mishnah gives us this premise. And when the Mishnah gives us a premise, we're not allowed to outright disagree with it. The Gemara rabbis have to find ways to poke holes or disagree around it, because there's this reverence for the generations that went before us. So we're going in these circles here.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I understand that. Okay.
That part. Yeah.
Okay.
So what is there to say if the father delivered his daughter to the agents of the husband? We had that question before of like, okay, so the daughter is now out of sight. She hasn't stood under the chuppah with the actual husband. She's gone off with a servant man, sort of like Rebecca going with Abraham's servant to go marry Isaac. We're in that kind of situation. So what happens then? The sages did not distinguish between such circumstances. That's the same answer we got before. But Beit Hillel says, well, there is both betrothal and a marriage contract in this case. No one will come to say that his sexual act was licentious intercourse. So this is still in line with Beit Hillel's general ethos of being lenient, even though it legitimizes a marriage situation that like might otherwise be illegitimate, and that Beit Hillel has mostly been trying to be lenient for the girl. But here he's also there, not he, Beit Hillel is a whole school of rabbis. They are also being lenient toward the man, that like,
right,
if the family agreed to this, there is a betrothal, there is a marriage contract, the girl has gone off with his agent, with all of that without refusal, then it's a marriage. And even if they do consummate, he won't be considered a bad guy.
Right.
And that, but that also then, the publishers explained for us a little bit. That's good, because I'm not sure I would have gotten there myself exactly. That not only is that good for the man, that he won't be considered engaging in harlotry or rape potentially, that it also still lengthens the time for which the girl can refuse, because Beit Hillel, remember, said she can still refuse even after the marriage, even if she's married as opposed to betrothed, whereas Beit Shammai said they couldn't. And one of Beit Shammai's reasons that the marriage couldn't be annulled after chuppah was because of this concern about any sexual act then being considered licentious. But if we take away that scandal possibility, then it extends the amount of time that the girl can still say no, or can still leave the marriage, annul the marriage.
I totally understand now why the Jewish people would go to their rabbi with questions on what do I do?
Yep. It's complicated. All right, Rav Papa has entered the chat. I love his name.
Yes.
There's a hip hop song in like the 90s. I like it when you call me Big Papa. Throw the hands in the air if you a true player. And every time I see Rav Papa, that's what I think. I like it when you call me Rav Papa.
Yeah.
Anyway, Tam'a devet Shammai mishum pere, Tam'a devet Hillel mishum pere. Okay, so the reasoning for Beit Shammai's opinion is because of the profits of the property she brings into the marriage. And Beit Hillel has the same reasoning.
Wow.
What?
Yeah.
Okay. So how did we arrive at different conclusions with the same reasons? Tama devet Shammai mishum pare, dei amart nisua tim'an. So Beit Shammai's opinion is because of the profits from her property. For if you say that a married minor girl may perform refusal, then the husband of that minor might seize those profits from her and consume them, as ultimately she stands to leave him if she refuses him later. So in the meantime, he will try to extract as much profit as he can. So he'll try to blow through her dowry quickly and accumulate other types of wealth that he can hold then if she leaves. If you open up that possibility that she can leave, then he'll try to still game the system. But Beit Hillel says, on the contrary, since you say, I love when they phrase it like that. Just soft. So it's like, let's say the rest of this. Okay, so since you say she may refuse, he will seek to improve her property. He will think, if I do not do so, her relatives will advise her to leave me, and they will take her from me. So it's the same. So Beit Hillel is the same. They're still concerned about the profits from her property, but they think that the husband will be more inclined to take care of her and use her dowry wisely in a way that benefits her as well, so that she won't want to leave.
But
Yes.
if she does leave, he can take her property.
He can try to take her property. It depends on how it depends on what the dowry is, I expect, and how it's been used. So if it's still like raw materials, whatever coins or fabrics or whatever she came with, she might be able to take those back. But if he has used them to buy land for his family or to
Right.
buy, livestock, to, that kind of stuff, like, invested it in, like, that can't go back with her.
And I was looking at it from the perspective of how much that limits her choices.
Yeah,
I mean, she could leave, but with what?
right. Which is the purpose of the ketubah, right? So that when, like, as an adult, if she pursues an actual divorce, there are protections. The ketubah, and now ketubahs are just like, we promise to love each other. They don't have that same kind of
Right,
legalistic
right.
language, but they used to say very specifically at, like, what her divorce settlement basically was, what her alimony was. And sometimes they would be very specific about, depending on the reason for the divorce and, like, the kind of harm that the husband has inflicted upon her, and, also commensurate with the size of her dowry. If she came in with a lot and he invested it and became a wealthy man, she's entitled to a much larger percentage
Oh,
of,
okay.
that kind of
Okay.
stuff. But I suppose if we're trying to annul it and not divorce it, then I guess there's not, I don't know, the rules are different.
Yeah. Huh.
Uh,
Sounds like part of it is they're trying to prevent a bait and switch.
yeah.
Here's my lovely
For who?
daughter. Well, here's my lovely daughter, sends her off to be married, and then says, oh, we're taking her back with all the stuff we promised you.
Okay.
That would be like a bait and switch. We baited him, but then we switched it and took her stuff back.
Yeah, but nobody gains.
Yeah, I suppose, but
Switch, somebody gains.
somebody
from it.
gains from it, yeah.
I suspect that these decisions are probably very complex with the families, with who has what power, and
Right.
for some families at least.
Well, and I think the specifics that we're talking about here about the minors, and her refusal and all of these things, this is probably hypothetical. Like, I actually believe that this probably didn't really happen often, if ever. It's a
About
thought
her
exercise.
refusing,
What?
about her refusing.
Yeah, or about her being married off too young. I mean, if they had this concept of her being too young, like if they had these concerns at all, then they probably didn't actually marry, they betrothed very young, but they probably didn't actually marry her off very young. And I think probably, I mean, I don't have a time machine, so I don't really know. And I don't know where I would look to find the exact, like, historical information on this. But my guess is, by the time that these rabbis are debating it, it maybe was still relevant at the time of the Mishnah when the concept is introduced. These rabbis are not actually engaging in any of this practice. They're teasing out the explanations and commentaries and argumentations
Okay.
as a thought exercise, as
Right.
a means of setting precedents and legal constructs for things like divorce and other or betrothal laws of, like, how young someone can be married off and things like that. That this is more about the thought exercise than actually
Right.
about setting practical law.
That's so interesting that they would spend, and I understand I don't know, almost the game of Talmud, that they would include it though in a written document. If it,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's what most of Talmud is that it started off as these very, like, theoretical debates, all of it oral, and then the Stam came along and ordered it, put them, so a lot of this was probably asynchronous conversation.
Right.
And then the Stam came along and put them like in a set order, so it looks like they're talking to each other, and
Right.
helps I don't know what the right word is, like memorialize, almost like helps pass down these learning techniques. It's pedagogy more than anything else.
It reminds me of doing like a literature search and then putting it together, I don't know, into a coherent document. Not that this is inherently coherent.
Coherent, yeah. There's lots of parts of the Talmud that are not so coherent.
Do you have to read the whole writings on a particular tractate to really get to what is being said? Like if you just read part of it, it's misleading.
That's a good question. The problem is there's never really a point. It's not like you can skip ahead to like the answer, because there's usually not an answer. So the practice is to read the whole thing. I mean, it is like,
okay,
yeah, if you really want to understand what the rabbis had to say on the topic of the tractate, you have to read the whole tractate. That's not to say, I don't know if we talked about this, but sometimes, you'll see like quotes taken really out of context from the Talmud, for like anti-Semitic purposes. And that's obviously problematic. Like then you've missed the point, because even in those sections where they do say things against Gentiles or whatever, they're generally talking very specifically about like the Gentiles currently oppressing them. Like they're not talking about and like that Jews are superior. They're talking about like the Romans are murdering us. Like that means they're clearly murderous, barbarous people. That's not the same as all Gentiles are murderous, barbarous people. You know what I mean?
yes, yes.
So that kind of stuff can be taken out of context. Generally, though, with something like this, we're looking at Yevamot out of context, and we're getting the gist of it. Like this is enough to understand the basic purpose of this tractate is about. It's about Levirate marriage law, which dovetails around various other aspects of marriage law. There is another tractate that is dedicated more to actual adult marriages and betrothals and ketubas and like, that kind of stuff. So this is not that. This is about the complexity of who I guess like who is entitled to certain relationships, like this marriage this match has been made, but she's a minor. What is her entitlement to refuse? Or this, the husband dies. What is the entitlement to the brother to still have a baby, or vice versa, the entitlement to the widow if the brother wants it. I don't know, whatever. Like there are these very specific laws. So you're seeing like you're still getting the gist. And since we're studying them together, I can tell you like the historical context that this is mostly theoretical, that like Chalitza was still practiced at the time of the Talmud, but Levirate, like almost everyone did Chalitza. They did not actually have the wedding. The brother didn't really marry the widow. They went through this sort of like formality of getting out of it. And so I guess if you read it out of context with bad faith or without a teacher to tell you that, you might be like, oh my God, Judaism's so weird. Why do they marry like this? Why are they marrying off minor children? Like you could get misled. But I don't know. I don't think that you I don't know. I feel like you can get a gist, you can get a taste of what is being said in any particular section because they do kind of like go in circles and like anything can
say.
be relevant to anything.
The last sentence in the 107B,
Yeah.
just read that one.
Okay. Hold on.
Well,
So let's look at what is the
the-
context here. So the consummation of the levirate bond may be against her will and she can nullify it.
It's not, I'm sorry, Rabbi, it's not just the last sentence, it's the whole
This
paragraph?
section.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. She can subsequently refuse the Yavam with whom she entered into levirate marriage. Rather, the reasoning is with regard to consummation of the levirate marriage and to levirate betrothal, both of which he performs, she can nullify them. But with regard to the levirate bond, which the merciful one imposes upon her at the death of her first husband, she cannot nullify it. Whereas Ula says she may direct her refusal even to his levirate bond. What is the reason? By refusing, she nullifies the original marriage rather than the levirate bond that resulted from the death of her husband.
Thank you.
Okay.
That was my reaction.
I think the bond is implicit. Like the fact that they have to go through chalitza is because the bond is there, whether or not she refuses the marriage.
Okay.
So it is unnullifiable. They are bound to acknowledge each other, the widow and the brother. However, she can refuse the marriage or betrothal at any stage of the consummation to the brother.
Now you say widow, so we're no longer talking about the young.
Yeah. Now
Okay.
we've switched to
Okay,
the levirate.
all right.
And
Sorry,
it was a bit abrupt, right? So we're talking, I skipped ahead, but it's still kind of abrupt. So we're talking about the minor girl. And that and Beit Shammai still doesn't think like that the man will even want to engage in the wedding if he thinks that the girl can refuse him afterwards. And Hillel says the marriage is convenient for both of them, even if it is nullified later, so as to generate publicity about them that they are married. Okay, so we've both said all of our things about
right.
whether or not the young girl can or should refuse and at what point, blah, blah, blah. And then it's just, they're done with that. So now we're talking about the chalitza. So,
Okay.
yeah. If the husband dies,
All right.
what is the girl's,
Or the woman then, right?
yeah, she could still be young. It says,
Well, sure.
a minor. So let's say she was betrothed or married but not consummated and the husband dies before, then she's still considered a widow. Doesn't that happen in Rashi's daughters in the middle one? She's betrothed, but then he dies in one of the pogroms.
Yes.
And then she's like, Oh no, I guess she still gets remarried. I don't know. I don't remember.
Then she learns Torah. Because didn't her
They
husband
all learn Torah.
study with her father?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay, well, we're almost out of time, so we didn't get as far on this one as we did on some of the brachot. I think because in brachot, we're talking about the Shema, we're talking about, we're starting from a base of having some idea of what they're talking about, even as they get into nitty gritty about times of day and how things are divided, which was just discussed in one of my, the lore podcast that I listen to, which is usually about spooky things. But they were talking recently about how different cultures have different concepts of time, and they were like explaining some of the stuff that we were just reading about in brachot, about like how the day is divided, and does the day start at sundown or sunrise or in the middle of the night, and how are nights divided, how are hours, if you don't have a 60-minute hour and a 12-hour day, like how do you know how do you tell time? And so all of that about the first watch and all that was very relevant. But here we're starting from a totally different context that's more obscure to us. And frankly, was probably more obscure even for the people writing it. Not as obscure as it is for us now, but like I said, not practical, but pedagogical. So, here's an example of, I mentioned this happens. So this is the Babylonian Talmud. Most of these rabbis are Babylonian rabbis, but there's always exchange. The Babylonian rabbis they still go visit Eretz Yisrael, and the Israeli rabbis come and visit Babylonia sometimes, and they learn from each other. So here Ravin, which is he's a Babylonian, that's an Aramaic name, he went to Eretz Yisrael, and then he brings back this information from Rabbi Yochanan, one of the leaders of the Israel Beit Midrash. And he has, more rules about a minor girl refusing a levirate marriage. But I just want to point out that exchange happens and how they introduce it. Okay, are there other questions about like structure and that kind of aspect, more so than the actual halakha here?
I wouldn't know what to ask.
This is the kind of thing where if we were in a formal class, if I had a chalkboard, I tried to do this last time with just like writing on the screen, but it was not, I don't know, I have difficulty figuring out how to use it correctly, but where we would write Beit Shammai, Beit Hillel, and like tease them out and see them next to each other, and how they, if this, then this on Beit Hillel, but if the same thing, then this on Beit Shammai, and that kind of stuff.
I think that would be fun. I really do think it would be fun to do, like, just what you're saying on a board, to like go through one piece like that to see all the different permutations that they go through.
Yeah. All right. I'll see what I can prepare for next time then for that.
We could work on it. No, never mind. You do it.
You can make the
Yeah.
You can make the squares, Terry. And the rabbi can fill them in.
There you go.
How many squares does it take?
Good question. All right, well, next week, we're meeting at 11
Okay.
instead of 1. And we'll wrap up our Talmud course.
Yeah, we're coming back on Saturday. That's good. No, I was just thinking if I was gonna be, if we're gonna be on the road, but no, yeah, well,
Yeah. Okay,
Have a good
Bye,
week,
everyone.
everyone. Bye.
bye, take care.